Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ULIN Consulting's podcast. Let's talk everyday equity at the justice table, from add-on to all-in, equity that inspires change. As you all know, my name is Anika Farrell, and I am the founder and CEO of ULIN Consulting, LLC, and this podcast. Today, we will be diving into thinking around and focusing on a question: what gets measured gets done. But you are measuring what? That's the important part of what matters. So today, equity scorecards and things that drive real change are going to be what we talk about. And we have an amazing guest here, Mr. Kendrick Friendly. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And Mr. Kendrick Friendly is an assistant principal in our Denver public school system, and we are just honored to have you here. And as we lay the groundwork for today's podcast recording, we want to think about how to measure equity beyond just diversity. So people think that diversity is part of those numbers and that gets measured, but what can we think of beyond that? And because of Mr. Friendly's role in leadership in our Denver public schools, we're going to have him really dive in and think about the perspective of a Black male. And that is important, that voice is important, and we want to be sure that we highlight that, because recruiting and retaining educators of color is difficult, and even more difficult as we think about Black males in roles. And so as we get started, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Friendly, why do you think it's critical to have an equity scorecard that is specifically focused on outcomes for educators of color and Black males specifically?
So I think, so first off, thank you for your question. And again, thank you for allowing me to be here. I think when we start talking about equity scorecards and how it relates to, especially Black males, representation is everything. And, we're in a day and time where we have students who really need to see individuals who look like them, who have the same type of experiences as them in front of them, leading not only from a discipline standpoint, but instructionally and just in a wide range of different roles. So when I think of an equity scorecard, I really think about how are we leveling the playing field by pulling others up and really encouraging them to see themselves in roles where they can then, reach back and help others in their community, as well as, just that understanding that not only can we survive, but we can thrive when put in situations where we are set up to be successful, where we're not having to always look, behind our backs. We're not always having to live with that stigma of working 2 or 3 times harder than other people, because we are built and we're here to do amazing things. So it's really just about creating those spaces for us to do those amazing things.
Mr. Friendly, you pointed out some really good points. It is about being able to be provided with opportunities to be amazing, because our Black and brown educators are amazing. I know, coming from the South, how important it was to see those Black educators in my educational environment and how it reinforced what education could look like for me as a Black woman. But then I also did see Black males in education too. And I know that it's pretty difficult at times for Black males to be successful in roles. So when I first met you and I found out that you were an assistant principal and that you were leading the work in schools and education, I thought about how do we move beyond just compliance, just getting Mr. Friendly in front of the students and the other educators to truly inform change in hiring and retention and that advancement. What can that look like when it comes to educators of color and Black males specifically in their roles?
Yes. So, as I think about your question, it makes me think back to something I heard about 2 or 3 years ago at a conference I was attending. The speaker stated, we do a really, really good job of speaking on and, building the systems to get our Black educators and our Black male educators through the door. But as soon as we're getting them through the door, they're finding a way to escape through the back door because of the way they're treated, because of the way they're seeing children treated, and just the system as a whole, as it just doesn't work for all of us as educators. So I think that, we've got to move past compliance. We've got to move past checking boxes, and we really have to focus on impact. I feel like when we focus on impact, the proof is right there in the pudding. Black educators make a huge difference, and it's not just what we do in the classroom, but it's just that communal approach that we bring to the work we do, where, you know, we're like, hey, I'm not going to let you fail. I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to push as hard as I can. I'm going, you know, I'm not even going to try to create a seat at the table. We're going to help you build your own table to be successful and to be great. But, you know, again, it has to be done in a place where we're able to be innovative. We're able to be authentically who we are. We're not there just to fill the status quo. We're not, you know, again, we're not checking off boxes, but we're really there because the work we do and the impact we have is seen, is valued, and is appreciated.
Oh, I love that. That really touches on another question that I have that I would love for you to expand on. When you say, I don't want to just have you at the table, I want you to build your own table. I want you to cultivate, and that's part of cultivating spaces where equity is embedded into that fabric, and everybody, no matter black, brown, male, female, you know that you exist and you should be there in a substantive way. And so when I think about hearing you say that, how do you decide what to measure that has the best support and value to sustaining those educators of color and those black males specifically? And how do we interpret that? So, you know, yes, we have them here. We see them coming in the door and out the door that quickly. How do we measure? What do we measure? How do we interpret that information so that we have a sustainable organization where people of color, black males specifically, can thrive and be well in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think about a quote that I read Bell Hooks state, where she stated, you know, that love is an action. And so when we're talking about what we measure, the numbers they're gonna clearly tell us what's happening. But when we look at that qualitative data, I'm a very big qualitative person. That doesn't jive well with a lot of people. You know, that qualitative data lets us know the why. It lets us know, like, why do we have to have these conversations about equity? Why has the needle not moved and we're seeing more equitable practices? Why are we in a place where, you know, in 2025, we're still trying to prove we're not less than? You know, just being able to show that love that we bring to the table, the action that is love that we bring to the table, that's the data right there. That's the data that speaks for itself. When I'm empowering other black educators to say, hey, you can change the narrative, or the narrative that you're coming to the table with is more than enough. Don't change it. Let's build on that, you know. And that's one thing that me as an older, you know, black educator, I really try to make sure that when I have a young black educator, I'm instilling in them that confidence. I'm giving them the resources I have, the supports I have, the network I have, so that they don't feel like, hey, I'm alone, I'm on this island. Because again, when you feel supported, when you have that confidence, then you're able to put that love into action. You're able to present that qualitative data like, hey, I can do this. This has been my experience. And it's a yes and not, well, the data has shown this percentage of we haven't seen these needles move. And so, you know, quantitatively, we need to move in a different direction, or quantitatively, I'm not enough to be successful in this system. And then we see what we've been seeing, where people are burnt out, or people are completely turned off from even wanting to be in education because they don't see it as an avenue where they can make impact change.
Exactly. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. People are leaving the career. I remember being younger, education was a place and a space where you were like, hey, that's where I want to be. I saw grandparents and aunts and uncles and all of those individuals within this system. And even though it wasn't always a system that was built for us, the people that I saw were navigating it and creating pathways for young folks like myself to be part of that system. So when I hear you say, I'm going to say as a seasoned educator, not as an older one. Okay. I'm going to say as a seasoned educator, you find yourself supporting educators in ways that help them know that they can thrive and be well and belong in that space, which is amazing. Now, I would ask, what is it that our leaders who are not black or brown, what do they need to do specifically so that they can change the dynamics of that data? Because the data shows that when black and brown people, black people specifically, come in the door, they're leaving out quickly because the spaces are not well for them. What is it that leaders can do to ensure this so that the data can change with retention?
So, that is a great question. I feel like there is twofold. And understand, I'm born and raised here in Denver, Colorado. So my experience looks a lot different from people who come from places where you have a bigger Black population. And so I will speak from my lens. I feel like leaders who don't look like me need to, first off, really check their biases and understand, how are your biases impacting how you're going to interact with me, not only on surface level, but, how are you really like getting below that surface level? How are you really showing up and not letting, just your biases and all those different things get in the way. I also, one of the big things we deal with here is just this whole theme of being an ally. If you're going to be an ally, I need you to be an ally when things are uncomfortable, as well as, when it's really, it's popular to be that ally. I think in my experiences, that has been one of the things that I see that has turned a lot of people away from education, because people will be allies and people will speak up for you and say all the right things when it's the popular thing to do. But when it's time to get into the nitty gritty, when it's those tough days where, hey, I just don't believe in myself and all I can do is bring enough to the table to just get through this day, then it's well, did we make the right decision? Or, your biases start to kick in and you start to doubt, the talents and the abilities of our educators of color. I think those things are going to be huge, and I'm a very strong believer in, we're not going to beg for a seat at the table. We're going to create our own table. So another thing, the leaders that don't look like me, give me some of the materials to make sure I can build a stable table and not just a temporary table where as soon as you turn your back, everything falls apart. And again, when we're talking about equity, equity is one of those things where we're trying to find a level the playing field. Give me that oak wood. Don't give me the plywood. Give me the good materials so that I have a strong foundation to not only build on, but to help others come in and feel that same support.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You said so many things that were wonderful. So I know our listeners are going to hear it and then they're going to take it and they're going to use it and implement it. And I want our listeners to understand that it's important, like you said, to check your biases at the door. You may think that you don't realize that you have them, but you do. Yes. All of us have biases and they show up differently. And our educators of color, our Black males specifically, feel that, they see that, they experience that. And I think it's important for leaders to understand that those biases have to be checked so that as you go through that process of learning and then unlearning and then relearning some new things, you're able to sustain those educators of color. Yes. In those environments. And so you use some really good examples already about how structural changes in organizations can help change that data. So if we start changing our thoughts and checking our biases, can help with retention. It can prevent individuals from leaving. It can support people staying because, as you mentioned, creating a table and then creating a new table that's for you. But you also mentioned too, I'd like to add on, is that people like to be allies. And allyship is fine. But we say something here about being a co-conspirator. That co-conspirator is somebody that when it gets really tough and somebody is going up against Mr. Friendly and it's wrong and it's egregious, that they're not going to just say, well, that's not right. They're going to say, let me step in and use my privilege to then make the change that needs to happen. So I appreciate you using that as an example. And so as you think about looking ahead, what does success look like when measurement and equity truly align? What does that look like in environments, education for you, for people to truly thrive, people of color and Black males specifically?
Honestly, I feel like success looks like us not having to continually have the equity conversation, us not having to find new ways to have the equity conversation that kind of trick people into thinking they're having a different conversation when it's really the same conversation we've been having for 20, 30 plus years. I think success looks like when you're able to look at the qualitative and the quantitative data, and you see that the needle has moved, you're seeing impact. You're seeing, people who are able to walk in their purpose, in their passion. You're seeing individuals who understand that, no longer is the status quo to just accept what's been given to you. The status quo is to build, to empower others to build, and to, set off on a trajectory where we're not even reimagining the system, we're dismantling a broken system, and we're putting things in place to deal with that brokenness, to not even deal with the brokenness. We're removing the brokenness altogether. People are able to show up whole, and that's for educators, that's for students, that's for parents, that's for community members. For me, it's getting back to a place where, and you spoke to it earlier, where when I was younger, when I did have a Black teacher, it was our 2 or 3 Black teachers, it was like, yo, that's what I want to do, because just the way they made you feel, it wasn't about ABCs, it wasn't about algebra, anything. It was just, when I'm in this person's presence, I feel loved, I feel seen. This is an extension from home. When I'm showing out a little bit, I know I'm gonna get checked with love. Like it was just that love and that support. I think about my experiences. I went to a predominantly white college, but my siblings went to HBCUs, and to hear the way they talked about, this professor would not let me fail, and it was a familial environment. That's what success looks like to me. That we get back to that place where we're caring for each other, and we're saying, I'm not going to let you fail. Yes, it's easy to walk in that front door and sprint out the back door, but let me, hey, before you do that, let's put this barrier up so you can see, hey, you can have this impact, and I'm going to walk this walk with you every step of the way.
Oh, right. I love that. And you're kind of wrapping it up too, because it is about being in community with people who look like you, who check you with love, who understand your experience, who are not going to let you fail. And that transcends into an environment that you want, that you look for, that you need. And so when you're not getting that, those demographics are impacting our organizations in a way that, okay, we can look at the demographics and see. I can say for myself, I worked in a school district where 70% of the educators were white women, 80 plus 90% students were students of color. They were not seeing themselves reflected in the demographics of that space. We would see people come in that were educators of color. I would host focus groups, hear about those lived experiences, and guess what? They were not being cultivated in a way where they wanted to stay. And then they did not see themselves promoted, and they did not see themselves, even students. I've been working with schools that they did not see themselves being appreciated, Black females. So all of those different experiences, those staff climate surveys, all of that. And then you think about the Black male specifically, that demographic gets so much smaller. And so when you talk about thriving in environments, we have to see that in order for any equity scorecard to change. Even if we are looking at that in a way to where we're like, okay, we see that we need more educators of color, but why are we not retaining them? We see the demographics. What does that mean? We're thinking that we are diversifying education, but what does that look like when they're leaving so quickly? And so you shared your experience about the impact that you've seen, how you've tried to impact others who are coming into your experience. But as we wrap up, I want you to share, if you could, what, if anything, that I did not cover with you that you'd like to share with our listening audience.
I mean, so first off, just thank you for this opportunity to really speak with you and just have this dialogue. I feel like it's important that, we're in a place where we have to normalize celebrating our greatness. We have to normalize celebrating what we bring to the table. We have to normalize not wanting to fit into a specific mold, but breaking those molds. Because, so one thing I see a lot of, so many of us are constantly told, comply, get into compliance. Well, if we're being honest with just the world we live in, compliance is getting people killed daily. compliance is not always going to be the thing that helps us move the needle, the thing that helps us keep our Black educators, the thing that is going to help protect our Black educators. I think more than anything, compliance is hurting us because the target is constantly moving, and we're trying to do this dance as opposed to being able to show up authentically who we are and just let our brilliance and our greatness shine. You know, I think we have to get to a place where, again, and we talked about it, it has to become more, you know, about community. It has to become more about, you know, just lifting each other up and really just loving on each other and celebrating each other. That's something that we don't see often, you know, and people need that, you know. And so really getting back to some of the what I consider the basics of just education. I'm not big on, you know, well, think about your why. Sometimes people's why is, hey, I just got bills to pay. No. Think about your purpose. Think about the legacy that you're leaving. And I think that's probably what I would want to end with. Like, let's be legacy driven. Let's not focus so much on just that here and now. What's the long game that we're playing? What is the end goal that we're able to, you know, achieve, and legacy we're able to leave behind, so that, like educators before us, people look back and they're like, you know what? No, I want to have the impact they had because of how they made me feel and the promotion that they were able to allow me to achieve just by their presence in my life.
Thank you so much for that. You are absolutely, you as a Black male, I want to say thank you for being in this space with me today, having that conversation, having an authentic conversation, and letting people know the importance of demographics are fine, equity scorecards are important, but what do we do beyond looking at that information, and how do we cultivate that information and make sure that we're retaining those educators who have been marginalized, who've been negatively impacted by communities. We have to think about that. And I so appreciate how you ended with that sentiment about, you know, looking beyond just who's in the room, but how are they thriving? And as a takeaway, listeners, I want you to think about, don't just track who's in the room. Track how they thrive once they're there. Remember, don't track who's in the room. Yes, we need to know demographics. Yes, we need to know those numbers. But then you have to think, in order to retain individuals successfully, where equity is embedded and belonging is embedded and psychologically safe is embedded, you have to look at how they're thriving when they're there. And so as we close, I want you to think about measuring what matters. Build equity that lasts and that is embedded into the fabric of your organization, and not an add-on. We don't want it to be an add-on. We want it to be all in. And so, Mr. Friendly, thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
I know that the leadership you're providing in different public schools is just amazing. But I, again, want to thank you so much for being here with me and sharing your information with our listeners.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I genuinely appreciate it. And please keep doing the great things you are doing.
All right. Thank you so much. Listeners, you heard it here on Let's Keep It Real. Let's keep it real with real people in the space. Thank you so much.